It was a Monday morning that felt heavier than most. The city was alive with its usual hum cars, honking, people rushing, the distant echo of construction somewhere down the street. The sky had opened up overnight, and now rain fell steadily, painting the sidewalks with slick reflections of neon signs and streetlights. Everyone seemed to be in a hurry, as if they were trying to outrun something unseen. A collective urgency that the city wore like a second skin. Alex was among them, juggling a coffee cup in one hand and a folder full of papers in the other. The pages threatened to slip with every step, but he tried to steady them, tucking them closer to his chest. His shoes clicked against the wet pavement, and his coat was drenched at the edges, but he barely noticed. He had an important meeting that morning, one that could change the trajectory of his career. He had gone over the details in his head a dozen times, rehearsing every point, every statistic. Nothing could go wrong, not today. Across the street, Jamie was moving at a similar pace, though her mind was elsewhere entirely. She had stayed up late the night before, reviewing a presentation she would deliver later in the day. Her hair was slightly damp from the rain, and she clutched her umbrella tightly, not trusting the gusts of wind that threatened to rip it from her grasp. She was focused, determined, but also a little anxious. She had never liked mornings this busy. The way everything seemed to move faster than the mind could follow. The streets were chaotic. Cars splashed through puddles, umbrellas collided, and people muttered curses as they slipped or were nearly drenched by passing taxis. In the midst of it all, Alex and Jamie were moving toward the same crosswalk. Neither knew the other existed yet, and neither could have guessed what the day would hold. As they approached the intersection, Alex's mind was still on his presentation. He barely noticed the blur of colors around him, the umbrellas, the rain, the people weaving through the crowd. He was thinking of numbers, charts, and the words he would say once he stepped into the meeting room. Every step felt mechanical, almost detached, as if he were moving on autopilot. Jamie, on the other hand, was scanning her surroundings, trying to avoid puddles and slipping on the wet pavement. Her thoughts were a jumble of ideas, anxieties, and reminders. Don't forget the notes. Don't spill coffee on your clothes. Don't trip. She didn't even register the people around her as individuals, just obstacles to navigate through. And then it happened. They locked eyes. It was one of those moments that felt impossible to explain. Time seemed to slow, even if only for a heartbeat. In the midst of the rain and the chaos, the crowded street, the hurried footsteps and the noise, there was this strange, sharp clarity. Alex's eyes met Jamie's, and for a brief instant, the rest of the world disappeared. It wasn't just a glance, it was something electric. Something that made the stomach tighten and the heart skip a beat. Something that made both of them pause without knowing why. But life doesn't pause for moments like that. A car honked too close, pulling Alex's attention back to reality. He stepped back instinctively, almost bumping into someone else who muttered a curse under their breath. Jamie had to sidestep quickly to avoid a puddle that threatened to soak her shoes. The magic of the moment shattered like glass. They both kept moving, caught up in the momentum of the city, their eyes separating too soon. Yet the memory of that glance stayed. Alex felt a strange warmth, a curiosity he couldn't name. It lingered in the corner of his mind even as he entered his office building, shaking off his wet coat and trying to focus on his work. Jamie, meanwhile, tucked her umbrella under her arm and hurried into her own office space, her thoughts momentarily derailed by that brief connection. A fleeting spark she couldn't quite explain. The rest of the day went on as if nothing had happened. Meetings, emails, phone calls, small talk with coworkers, it all moved in its predictable rhythm. But for Alex, there was a subtle difference. Every time someone spoke to him, he found his attention drifting, wondering about the person he had locked eyes with that morning. He couldn't remember much about her face beyond the eyes, the color, the shape, the intensity, but that alone was enough to pull his thoughts in unexpected directions. Jamie felt the same. Every time she reviewed her notes or glanced at the clock, she felt a twinge of something she didn't want to fully understand. She had seen people every day, interacted with strangers constantly, yet this fleeting moment felt different. It was not infatuation. Not exactly, it was something sharper, more elusive. something that made her heart recognize connection before her mind even had a chance to process it by the time evening rolled around. Both Alex and Jamie were exhausted from the day's work. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the city lights. People hurried home, umbrellas tucked away, coats clinging to their damp bodies. The city had returned to a quieter rhythm, but for Alex and Jamie, the day's events lingered. Alex lingered on the office steps for a moment, staring at the reflections in the puddles, wondering if he would ever see those eyes again. There was a strange pull, a thought he couldn't shake, that maybe somewhere out there, the other person was thinking of him too. He shook his head and muttered to himself, forcing a small laugh. "Get a grip," he said, but the feeling didn't leave. Jamie walked down the street slowly, letting the cool night air wash over her damp hair. She smiled faintly to herself, a small private acknowledgement of the moment she couldn't explain. The city seemed quieter now, as if it, too, had taken a breath after the chaos. And in the quiet, that fleeting connection replayed in her mind. A memory both vivid and strangely comforting. Neither of them knew it yet. But that moment, the brief locking of eyes in the middle of chaos, would be the beginning of something neither had planned. Something that would creep into their thoughts, influence their decisions, and in ways neither could foresee, shape the next few months of their lives. Life, as it often does, had placed them together at the exact moment they were both too busy, too distracted, too caught up in their own worlds to notice. And yet, it had also marked them with a spark. A tiny seed of connection that had the potential to grow into something neither of them could have predicted. As they disappeared into the crowd, separate paths leading in opposite directions. Both Alex and Jamie carried with them the memory of that instant. It was a simple moment, one small intersection on a rainy city street. But it was enough to remind them that life could surprise you when you least expected it. That sometimes the most important things happen in the smallest, quickest flashes, moments that leave you wondering, moments that linger long after they've passed. The night fell, and the city lights reflected in puddles, like tiny stars scattered across the streets. Somewhere in the rhythm of the rain, the honking of distant cars, and the chatter of people. The memory of that glance lived quietly, waiting for the next chance to reveal itself, waiting for the next moment when paths might cross again, and for now, that was enough. The following week began, much like any other. With the city moving in its predictable rhythm of chaos and routine, Alex arrived at the office early, carrying a briefcase that felt heavier than usual, though he couldn't quite explain why. He had a long to-do list, meetings stacked back-to-back, and emails flooding his inbox. He prided himself on keeping everything under control. But there was a restlessness in his chest that morning, an unease he couldn't shake. Jamie, meanwhile, was balancing her own workload with the quiet pressure of impending deadlines. Her morning had started earlier than usual, the hum of her alarm pulling her from a dream she couldn't quite remember. She went through her usual routine mechanically, brushing her hair, grabbing a quick breakfast, and checking her phone for messages. Everything seemed normal, yet there was an underlying tension she couldn't name, a nagging thought that something important had happened recently. Something she had only glimpsed for a fleeting second on a rainy street. It was one of those mornings where the world felt particularly small and strangely connected. The streets were busy, as always, people moving with purpose, umbrellas opening and closing like clocks marking the rhythm of life. Yet neither Alex nor Jamie expected the city to place them in the same place at the same time again by sheer coincidence. Or perhaps fate, they found themselves in the same meeting room that morning. The office was unusually quiet for that time, a soft hum of computers and the occasional ring of a phone punctuating the calm. Alex was already seated, reviewing his notes, unaware that the next few hours would be unlike any other he had spent in that room. Jamie entered, carrying her laptop and a stack of papers. Their eyes met again. This time there was no fleeting glance, no brief instant of recognition swallowed by chaos. This time, the encounter lasted long enough for both of them to fully register each other. Alex's heart skipped, and a strange tension settled into the room. Jamie's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise and recognition passing across her face. Neither spoke. They simply stared, holding that silent acknowledgement of the memory they both carried, and then reality hit. The meeting began, and their focus was demanded immediately. Reports were presented, numbers analyzed, and plans discussed. Both tried to concentrate, but the memory of that initial glance on the rainy street was an invisible presence between them, making it difficult to focus. Every time Alex looked up from his notes, he caught Jamie's eyes, and every time Jamie raised her head, Alex seemed to be there, waiting for the slightest acknowledgement. It was a delicate dance of avoidance and curiosity, both aware of the connection but unwilling to act on it. The worst possible timing had struck. Both were professionals, aware of boundaries and the unspoken rules of workplace conduct. Any hint of personal interest could create complications, misunderstandings, or gossip, and yet they could not ignore the pull, the way the air seemed charged when they were near each other. Throughout the meeting, Alex noticed small details he hadn't before, the way Jamie adjusted her notes when she was nervous, the faint click of her pen against the desk, the careful way she organized her papers. Jamie, in turn, noticed Alex's habit of tapping his foot when deep in thought, the way he leaned slightly forward when he was curious, the subtle flicker of a smile that appeared when something amused him. These observations were unconscious, almost imperceptible, but they built a silent intimacy that neither wanted to acknowledge fully. When the meeting ended, both lingered longer than necessary, gathering papers, pretending to organize files, all while stealing glances at each other. Alex considered speaking, but the words died in his throat. Jamie debated saying something, anything, but her voice seemed trapped behind a wall of caution. They were tethered by the memory of the first encounter, yet restrained by the reality of the moment. Outside the meeting room, the office felt different. The corridors were quiet, the soft buzz of fluorescent lights creating a muted backdrop. Alex walked toward the coffee machine, pretending to need a refill, only to find Jamie already there, waiting for the same. Neither spoke immediately, both caught in a delicate tension. Alex finally managed a small smile, a gesture that was casual yet deliberate. Jamie returned it, her lips curving gently, eyes softening for a moment. Words were unnecessary. The recognition, the shared memory, and the unspoken understanding of timing filled the space between them. It was enough for now. Over the next few days, their paths continued to cross. Emails with professional courtesy carried subtle undertones of familiarity. Shared projects required brief meetings, each encounter a careful balance between professionalism and personal curiosity. The worst timing persisted. Every attempt to connect personally was interrupted by deadlines, responsibilities, and the constant awareness of workplace norms. Yet, each interaction strengthened the invisible thread that had begun on the rainy street. Outside work, both found themselves distracted. Alex caught himself replaying moments from the meeting, wondering what Jamie was thinking, if she remembered that initial glance, if she felt the same tension he did. He tried to focus on his own life, his hobbies, and friends. But there was a quiet pull that tugged at him whenever his mind wandered. Jamie experienced a similar distraction. She found herself smiling at small reminders of Alex, a pen she had seen him use, a phrase he had said, a mannerism she had noticed. These thoughts were subtle, but persistent. They invaded her mind during commutes, quiet evenings, and even while focusing on her work. She wondered if she was overthinking, if it was merely a fleeting curiosity. Yet the memory of that glance lingered, undeniable and persistent. The tension between them grew more noticeable as the days passed. Colleagues began to sense the slight awkwardness, the occasional lingering eye contact, the brief smiles that lasted a little too long. Neither wanted to create problems or rumors, so they maintained the outward appearance of professionalism, masking the internal chaos with polite nods and carefully measured words. One afternoon, a shared project required them to work closely together in a small conference room. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken words and cautious glances. Alex spoke first, breaking the ice with a question about the data they were reviewing. Jamie responded, her voice steady but softer than usual, tinged with curiosity. As they collaborated, the professional environment forced them to focus on the task, yet the subtle awareness of each other's presence lingered. Every choice of words, every glance, every small movement carried the weight of unspoken understanding. Despite the pressure, there were moments of shared laughter, small discoveries of common habits, and mutual respect for each other's dedication. These moments were fleeting, but they built a quiet bond that neither could deny. It was a connection forged in shared experience, in the subtle recognition of something beyond work, yet constrained by the boundaries of circumstance. The day ended, and both left the office feeling the lingering weight of unspoken words. Alex walked home slowly, letting the cool evening air wash over him, thinking of Jamie, replaying the encounters, and wondering what it would be like to speak freely. Jamie, meanwhile, took a longer route home, allowing the city lights to blur into reflections on wet pavement, thinking of Alex, of the shared moments, and the strange pull she could not explain. That night, the memory of the first glance on the rainy street combined with the encounters in the office, forming a complex web of emotions. It was curiosity, fascination, and something deeper, a recognition of a connection that neither could articulate fully. Sleep came reluctantly, and when it did, dreams carried fragments of faces, fleeting moments, and the sense of something important waiting to be discovered. By the next morning, the pattern continued. They moved through the day with the same professionalism, same careful navigation of boundaries, yet the invisible thread between them had grown stronger. Each shared glance, each brief interaction, and each silent acknowledgement became a quiet rhythm in their lives. Subtle, but undeniable. They both knew the timing was terrible. They knew acting on feelings could complicate everything, yet the connection was undeniable. It was a strange balance, wanting to explore the spark, but knowing the consequences. Wanting to reach out, but restrained by circumstance. Life had placed them together at the worst possible moment. But even that could not erase the seed of connection planted long before either of them had realized it. And so they continued. Each day was a mixture of routine and subtle tension. Professional obligations and personal curiosity, ordinary workdays filled with extraordinary undercurrents. The world moved around them, unaware of the silent story unfolding in the quiet spaces between meetings, emails, and hallway encounters. By the end of the week, the realization was undeniable. Something had begun that neither could ignore. The memory of the rainy street, the fleeting glance, and the encounters in the office had become more than chance. It was a connection shaped by timing, circumstance, and the invisible pull of recognition, quietly threading through their lives in ways that demanded attention, even if neither was ready to admit it. And so they waited. Not consciously, but inevitably. Waiting for a moment when life might allow them to act, when timing would no longer be the obstacle, when the spark could finally become something real. The worst timing had not extinguished the connection. It had only made it more persistent, more insistent, and more impossible to ignore. Life had placed them in the same room, at the same office, at the same time. And though the circumstances were far from ideal, the connection was undeniable. And in that realization, there was both tension and hope. A quiet anticipation of what might come. A subtle acknowledgement that sometimes the hardest moments are the ones that hold the most meaning. Days passed, and the city continued its relentless pace. But for Alex and Jamie, the rhythm of life had subtly shifted. The memory of their encounter on the rainy street and the shared moments in the office seemed to follow them everywhere. It was a strange sensation, like a quiet hum in the background of their lives. One that neither could fully name, but both recognized immediately when it surfaced. Alex noticed it first during his morning commute. The subway was crowded, filled with the usual mix of tired passengers, loud conversations, and the occasional street performer playing a violin somewhere near the entrance. He stood pressed against the wall, gripping the strap of his bag, and found himself scanning the crowd almost absent-mindedly. His mind wandered to Jamie, to the brief shared glances, to the way her eyes seemed to linger in his memory longer than they had any right to. He shook his head, trying to focus, but the image refused to fade. Jamie was experiencing the same thing. Walking along the sidewalk, umbrella in hand. She passed familiar shops and cafes that she had noticed hundreds of times before. But today everything seemed sharper, more vivid. She remembered Alex's face, the subtle way he had listened, the slight crease of his brow when thinking, the careful gestures he made when organizing papers. She wondered if he was thinking of her now, if he remembered the small details she did. The thought brought an unintentional smile to her lips, though she quickly pressed it back into a neutral expression before anyone could notice. The tension between them grew in subtle ways at work. Every time they passed in the corridor, their eyes would meet briefly, just long enough to send a ripple of awareness through both. It was not bold or reckless. It was quiet, restrained, and heavy with unspoken acknowledgement. Their colleagues noticed small differences, minor shifts in behavior. Alex seemed distracted at times, caught staring into space as if his mind was somewhere else. Jamie occasionally paused in her steps, her eyes flickering toward him before she quickly focused back on her tasks. Even small gestures became meaningful. A shared smile over a coffee cup, a nod acknowledging the same report. The way they reached for the same pen in a meeting, these tiny interactions carried a weight that neither could ignore. It was a slow burn, a careful dance where every step had to be measured. Neither wanted to ruin the fragile balance they were maintaining. Yet neither could deny the growing pull that connected them. One afternoon, a meeting was scheduled to discuss a project that required close collaboration. They were seated next to each other, laptops open, notes spread out on the table. The air between them felt heavier than usual, charged with an energy they could not name. Both tried to focus on the slides, the data, the numbers, but the awareness of each other's presence kept intruding. Every glance, every gesture seemed amplified. More significant than it truly was, Alex noticed the way Jamie tapped her pen lightly against the table. What? When she was thinking. The way she tilted her head slightly when reading a report. Jamie noticed the subtle crease in Alex's brow when concentrating. The quiet hum he made when absorbed in work, the way his eyes darted up occasionally to meet hers. These were ordinary habits, mundane details, but to them, they felt intimate. It was as if the world had shrunk to the space between them. The professional context fading in importance compared to the silent connection that pulsed beneath the surface. Lunch breaks became another subtle battlefield of curiosity and restraint. Both wanted to find excuses to share a moment outside of meetings, but timing was always cruel. When Alex thought of approaching Jamie, she was busy with a call or heading somewhere else. When Jamie imagined inviting him for a quick coffee, he was already engrossed in a conversation with another colleague. Each missed opportunity added weight to the tension, making the connection more pressing, more urgent, yet still unattainable. Outside the office, their thoughts continued to drift toward each other. Alex found himself replaying conversations in his mind, imagining what it would be like if he could speak freely, if he could ask about her life, her interests, her thoughts on everything beyond the office walls. Jamie did the same, wondering if he noticed the small ways she adjusted her work, the little things that revealed more than she intended. Each memory, each imagined interaction, created a private world that neither could share with anyone else. The weekends offered no relief. Alex spent his Saturday walking through the park, coffee in hand, thinking of the faintest details about Jamie, the way her hair fell over her shoulder, the subtle curve of her smile, the intensity in her eyes that had first caught him on the rainy street. Jamie wandered through a nearby bookstore, pausing to run her fingers along the spines of books, imagining what Alex would think of a certain title, what he might choose if he were there. It was a quiet, private obsession, one born not of infatuation, but of recognition, of a spark that refused to be ignored. Work continued to provide moments of connection, however small. A brief exchange over a shared document, a comment in a meeting that elicited a fleeting smile, or a glance across the room that lasted just a second longer than necessary. All these moments built layers of understanding between them. Each layer added complexity to their emotions, a mixture of curiosity, longing, and frustration. They both knew acting on these feelings could be complicated, even reckless, yet the pull was undeniable. One rainy afternoon, mirroring their first encounter, they found themselves caught in a sudden downpour on the way to a client meeting. Both had umbrellas, yet the wind whipped the rain sideways, soaking jackets and dampening spirits. In the chaos, they collided almost literally, each startled by the unexpected proximity. Their eyes met immediately, and for a long moment there was silence. The rain, the wind, the hurried footsteps of passers-by faded into the background. All that existed was the presence of each other, soaked and unprepared, yet utterly aware of the connection that refused to be ignored. "Sorry," Alex said finally, voice breaking slightly, more from the sudden proximity than from guilt. Jamie smiled faintly, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. "It's okay," she replied, her voice steady despite the flurry around them. The words were ordinary, mundane even, but in that moment, they carried a weight neither could ignore. They continued walking, side by side, yet carefully apart. Each step measured to maintain balance between professionalism and curiosity. Every detail was amplified, the sound of water dripping from umbrellas, the smell of wet pavement, the rhythm of hurried footsteps. It was intimate without words, a shared experience that deepened the silent bond forming between them. By the time they reached the office, both were drenched but somehow lighter. The shared ordeal, brief as it was, became another thread in the intricate web of connection. They changed into dry clothes, each carrying the memory with them, replaying the moment quietly in their minds. Alex thought about the way Jamie's eyes had held his gaze, even as the rain obscured everything else. Jamie remembered the tension in his shoulders, the way he had instinctively shielded her from the worst of the wind. As the days rolled on, the tension continued to build. Both were acutely aware of the growing connection, but remained cautious, careful to maintain boundaries. There were moments of near confession, half-spoken words, gestures that lingered too long, smiles that carried more meaning than intended. Each moment added to the invisible thread between them, weaving a tapestry of shared understanding that neither could fully articulate. Sleep became a time for reflection. Alex would lie awake, replaying the day's encounters, wondering how Jamie viewed the moments they shared. Jamie would do the same, imagining his thoughts, questioning the significance of each glance, each smile, each gesture. The days became a mix of anticipation and frustration, a delicate balance between curiosity and restraint. In the office, small changes began to manifest. Both found excuses to work closer together, to collaborate on small tasks, to share brief moments that deepened the connection without crossing any lines. The tension was palpable to anyone paying attention, though those around them remained unaware of the depth of unspoken emotions. The relationship existed in a quiet, invisible space, marked by fleeting moments, subtle glances, and the persistent awareness of each other's presence. By the end of the third week, it was undeniable. Something significant had begun, though neither could name it fully. It was not love, not yet, but it was a connection that neither could ignore. It was the recognition of a spark, a quiet understanding, a shared curiosity that demanded attention. The worst timing had created the strongest tension, and in that tension lay the promise of something meaningful, something real, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And so, life continued, ordinary on the surface, extraordinary in the small details. Each glance, each word, each shared moment carried weight, building a foundation that neither Alex nor Jamie could fully comprehend. The city moved on, busy and chaotic, unaware of the subtle story unfolding in its midst. And in the quiet spaces between work, deadlines, and rain-soaked streets, the connection between them deepened, growing in complexity, intensity, and quiet anticipation. They were aware, both of them, that the timing was far from perfect. Yet they also knew, without saying it aloud, that some things were undeniable, that some connections could not be ignored, no matter how inconvenient, no matter how frustrating. And in that knowledge lay both hope and tension, a quiet understanding that life had placed them together for a reason. Even if the reason was not yet clear, the days continued to move like clockwork, each one filled with the rhythm of the city, the office, and responsibilities that refused to wait. Yet for Alex and Jamie, the world had subtly shifted, colored by the invisible thread that connected them. They were both aware of it now, not in loud or obvious ways, but in quiet moments when the ordinary became extraordinary simply because the other was near. It was during one of these ordinary days that Alex first noticed the depth of the connection more clearly. He had been working on a report late into the afternoon, the office emptying gradually as colleagues left for the day. The hum of the fluorescent lights above was steady, the occasional click of a keyboard punctuating the silence. Jamie appeared at the doorway, holding her laptop and some papers, hesitating just long enough for him to notice. "Still here?" she asked, her voice casual but soft, carrying a warmth that he hadn't noticed before. "Yeah," Alex replied, shifting papers aside to make room for her. "I wanted to finish this before tomorrow. You." "I had a few things to finalize," she said, stepping in. Her eyes scanned the room quickly before settling on him. "Mind if I join?" "Not at all," he said, though his heart had skipped a beat. The invitation was simple, professional even, but it carried a weight neither of them fully acknowledged. They worked in silence for a while, the quiet companionship more comfortable than either expected. It wasn't awkward, but it wasn't casual either. It was a space that felt rare, intimate in its own way. Alex noticed how focused Jamie was, how she would pause occasionally to think. Tapping her pen lightly against her laptop, eyes narrowing slightly, Jamie noticed how Alex leaned forward when reading something carefully, his fingers drumming softly on the desk, brows furrowed in concentration. Each was aware of the other, yet both pretended not to be. The small talk began naturally. Alex commented on the weather, something mundane and unimportant, but the way Jamie responded, with a slight smile and a relaxed tone, made the moment feel significant. They shared small laughs over typos in the report, brief jokes that felt spontaneous, yet carried the warmth of personal attention. These were ordinary interactions, yet every gesture, glance, and word built layers of understanding between them. After a while, Jamie glanced at the clock. "I should probably head out soon," she said, though there was no urgency in her tone. "Yeah, me too," Alex replied, though he felt a twinge of disappointment. He wanted to prolong the moment, to find more things to say, to keep the comfortable connection alive a little longer, as she gathered her things. Their hands brushed briefly over the laptop cord. It was a small, accidental contact, but it sent a surprising jolt through both of them. Jamie's cheeks warmed slightly, and Alex had to look away, focusing on the papers in front of him even though his mind refused to cooperate. Neither mentioned it, but the air between them had changed subtly, charged with a quiet awareness of proximity and connection. The next day, the office seemed to hum differently. Both were aware of the lingering effects of the previous evening, the small, shared moments now magnified in their minds. Emails were written with careful attention, not just to content, but to tone. Brief hallway encounters felt weighted, each step toward the coffee machine, each passing glance carrying a quiet significance. A shared project brought them together again in a conference room. This time, the meeting was longer, more interactive, requiring them to discuss ideas, brainstorm solutions, and review data together. The professional context remained, but the familiarity they had begun to develop made the interaction smoother, more comfortable. They anticipated each other's needs, understood each other's thinking, and navigated the discussion with an almost seamless rhythm. Jamie noticed how Alex's eyes softened slightly when he explained a complex point. The way he leaned in just enough to show attentiveness without invading personal space. Alex noticed the way Jamie's fingers moved when she was organizing notes, how she would occasionally tilt her head when thinking, and how her eyes sparkled slightly when she found a solution that satisfied her. The attention to detail, the quiet observation was no longer casual, it was personal, subtle, and meaningful. During a break, they walked to the nearby cafe to grab a cup of coffee. The conversation was light at first, professional even, discussing updates and deadlines. But gradually, it shifted, gently and almost unconsciously, into small personal details. Alex mentioned a podcast he had been listening to, something trivial yet revealing of his interests. Jamie responded with her own favorite, and for a moment, they were no longer just colleagues. They were two people sharing pieces of their world, fragments of their lives. The cafe was crowded, yet in their small corner, it felt like a private bubble. Conversations around them faded into the background. Jamie laughed at something Alex said, the sound light and unforced. Alex felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't expected, the sense that the world had grown slightly brighter, slightly more meaningful. Simply because she was present, they returned to the office with the shared glow of the moment still lingering. The rest of the day passed in a blur of work, but the memory of the cafe, the shared laughter, the brief touches on cups and chairs remained vivid in both their minds. Every small gesture, every quiet moment, was building something that neither could yet name. But both were beginning to feel deeply. Even outside the office, the connection persisted. Alex found himself walking through the city streets in the evening, replaying moments from the day, imagining conversations that hadn't happened, and wondering how Jamie perceived each interaction. Jamie, in turn, found herself lingering at the bookstore, flipping through books slowly, imagining what Alex might enjoy, what he might find interesting. It was a quiet obsession, born not of infatuation, but of curiosity, recognition, and a slowly growing emotional bond. One evening, a chance encounter at a crosswalk brought them together again unexpectedly. They had both left the office late, the city streets slick with rain once more. The lights reflected in puddles, casting a soft glow around them. They collided almost literally as they tried to navigate the crowded sidewalk, umbrellas clashing briefly. "Oh, sorry," Alex said immediately, holding the umbrella steady. "No, it's fine," Jamie replied, her voice calm yet carrying an edge of warmth. For a moment, they just stood there, waiting for the pedestrians around them to pass. Their eyes met, and this time there was no hesitation. Recognition, familiarity, and a hint of longing were all there, unspoken yet palpable. Neither needed to speak. The silence carried its own meaning. "I didn't expect to see you here," Alex said finally, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Neither did I," Jamie replied, matching the smile. The words were simple, ordinary even, yet the way they were delivered made the world around them fade. Leaving only the two of them in that small, rain-slicked moment, they walked together for a few steps, careful not to intrude too closely, yet aware of the subtle intimacy in sharing the same space. Conversation drifted naturally, a mix of mundane details and small personal touches. Every word, every laugh, every glance reinforced the connection that had been growing quietly over the past weeks. Back at their respective apartments, both replayed the encounter repeatedly. Alex remembered the way Jamie's eyes had held his gaze, the small tilt of her head, the faint smile that lingered even as she moved past him. Jamie remembered the gentle way Alex had steadied the umbrella, the warmth in his voice, the careful way he had walked beside her. The memory was vivid, more meaningful than any professional interaction they had shared, more impactful than any planned encounter could have been. Over the following days, their bond continued to grow. Small gestures became more frequent, shared coffee breaks, subtle jokes, casual touches that lasted just a moment too long. Every interaction was careful, measured, yet layered with unspoken understanding. The tension remained, but it was no longer just about curiosity or frustration. It was about discovery, about learning the rhythm of the other, about acknowledging a connection that neither could ignore. Work became a space not only for responsibility, but for subtle intimacy. They began anticipating each other's needs, offering small help before it was requested, noticing preferences and habits that no one else seemed to see. The connection was no longer accidental. It was deliberate, quiet, and persistent. By the end of the fourth week, both Alex and Jamie were acutely aware of what was happening between them. It was no longer just fleeting glances or chance encounters. It was a growing emotional bond, shared understanding that transcended words. Yet the awareness of timing, of circumstance, and of boundaries kept them cautious. They were aware of the risk of the complexity, but the pull was undeniable, and so they continued. Each day brought small moments of connection, subtle gestures of care, shared laughter, and quiet acknowledgement. The city moved around them, oblivious to the story unfolding in its midst. The workdays passed, punctuated by brief, meaningful encounters, while evenings and weekends were filled with quiet reflection and anticipation. They had discovered something rare, something unspoken yet deeply felt, a connection that neither could ignore. And though the timing was far from perfect, the bond was undeniable. in the ordinary rhythm of life, amidst the rain, the office, and the bustling city. Alex and Jamie were weaving a story of subtle intimacy, quiet recognition, and growing understanding, a story that had only just begun. The weeks that followed were unlike any other. Alex or Jamie had experienced the office, which had once been simply a place of routine and deadlines, had transformed into a space alive with possibility. Every glance, every brief interaction carried weight, a silent communication that neither could fully explain but both understood instinctively. Yet the tension remained. Both were aware of the risks, the timing, and the boundaries that still constrained them. And still, the pull between them was undeniable. It was a Friday afternoon when things began to change. The city was buzzing as usual, a mix of people hurrying home and tourists wandering slowly, umbrellas bobbing in the soft rain that had returned unexpectedly. Alex was at his desk, reviewing notes for a client meeting the following week. His thoughts, however, were only partly on the work. They kept drifting to Jamie, to the small moments they had shared over the past month, and to the quiet anticipation that seemed to hover whenever they were near each other. Jamie, on the other side of the office, was feeling the same pull. She had finished her tasks for the day and was now organizing her notes, her mind wandering over the subtle interactions that had become the rhythm of her days. Each glance, each brief smile, each accidental touch replayed vividly in her mind. There was a mixture of excitement and caution. She wanted to see where this connection could go. Yet she was painfully aware of the delicate balance they had been maintaining. The opportunity came unexpectedly. A colleague had suggested a small team outing to celebrate the completion of a big project. It was casual, optional, but most of the team decided to attend. The venue was a cozy cafe that opened into a small garden courtyard, warm lights casting a soft glow over the tables and paths. Alex and Jamie arrived separately, but soon found themselves walking toward the same table, each feeling a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. The evening began with casual conversations, laughter, and the kind of chatter that fills spaces without necessarily meaning anything. Yet for Alex and Jamie, every interaction was amplified. Their eyes found each other repeatedly, subtle smiles exchanged across the table, quiet acknowledgments in the midst of group conversations. The ordinary had become extraordinary simply because the other was present. At one point, Alex excused himself to get a glass of water. Jamie watched him leave, her thoughts momentarily swirling with memories of their previous encounters, the rainy street, the quiet office collaboration, the cafe conversation they had shared earlier. When he returned, he paused by her chair, offering a small smile and a gentle nod. A simple gesture that made her chest tighten in a way she hadn't expected. "Do you want some?" he asked, holding a small plate of pastries. The question was casual, polite, but the tone carried something more, something unspoken yet clear. Jamie looked at him, a smile tugging at her lips. "Sure, thank you," she said softly, taking a pastry and feeling the brush of his hand as he passed it to her. It was a small moment, almost insignificant to anyone else, but to them it was electric, filled with layers of recognition, trust, and quiet anticipation. As the evening progressed, the team began to disperse, conversations breaking off as people said goodbyes and made plans to leave. Alex and Jamie found themselves walking together toward the exit, a chance to continue the interaction away from the group. The rain had stopped, leaving the city's streets glistening, reflecting the soft glow of streetlights. There was a calmness to the night, a pause in the usual chaos that allowed them to exist in a space all their own. "I'm glad we didn't get caught in the rain again," Alex said lightly. Though his tone carried more warmth than the words alone suggested, Jamie laughed softly. "It would have been memorable, at least," she replied, thinking back to their first encounter on that rainy street weeks ago. The memory was vivid, a marker of the beginning of everything between them. They walked in silence for a moment, side by side but careful not to close the distance too quickly. Each step was measured, yet there was a natural rhythm, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond that had grown between them. The tension that had been building for weeks seemed to stretch and bend, filling the space around them with anticipation and the unspoken question of what might come next. Finally, Alex spoke again, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. "Jamie, I know the timing hasn't been ideal. I know we've both been careful because of, well, everything. But I can't ignore this anymore." His eyes met hers, steady and sincere. Carrying the weight of weeks of unspoken emotion, Jamie paused, her heart beating faster. She had felt the same way for weeks, navigating the same balance of curiosity, attraction, and caution. "I feel the same," she admitted softly, a small smile breaking through. "It's been hard to ignore, but I didn't want to complicate things." The admission hung in the air between them, charged and delicate. The weeks of subtle glances, shared laughter, and quiet understanding had led to this moment. It was not dramatic or rushed. It was a careful acknowledgement of a connection that had grown organically, patiently, and insistently over time. They walked a little farther. Stepping into a quieter street away from the bright lights of the main road, Alex stopped, turning to face her, the city lights reflecting softly in his eyes. "I want to see where this goes," he said simply, honestly. "I don't want to pretend anymore that this is just work or coincidence. I think there's something here, something real." Jamie nodded, feeling a sense of relief and excitement. "I want that too," she said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "I've been trying to hold back, trying to make sense of the timing, but it doesn't matter anymore. I want to see what this can be." For the first time in weeks, the tension between them relaxed, replaced by a quiet warmth and understanding. The pull that had been so strong and unrelenting now had direction, purpose, and mutual recognition. They were no longer navigating boundaries in silence. They were acknowledging the connection, ready to explore it together. The walk continued. Lighter now, filled with conversation that flowed naturally. They talked about work, about small personal details they had shared in passing, about interests, memories, and thoughts that had been quietly observed but never voiced. The words felt easy, comfortable, as if the weeks of anticipation had prepared them for this moment of openness. When they reached a small park, they stopped to sit on a bench under the soft glow of a street lamp. The city moved around them, but in this small space it felt as if time had slowed. The air was cool, the scent of wet earth lingering. The quiet hum of distant traffic provided a gentle soundtrack. Alex turned toward Jamie, hesitant for a moment before speaking again. "I'm glad we didn't just ignore this," he said softly. "I was afraid we might, just because it seemed too complicated." Jamie reached out, placing her hand lightly on his. It was a small, careful touch, yet it carried more meaning than words could express. "I was afraid too," she admitted. "But I think some things are worth the risk." The weeks of subtle tension, of careful observation, of unspoken understanding, all led to this quiet acknowledgement. It was not grandiose or dramatic. It was intimate, human, and real. They had navigated the challenges of timing, circumstance, and caution. And now they were free to explore the connection that had been growing all along. The conversation continued, flowing naturally between laughter, shared thoughts, and quiet moments of reflection. Each word strengthened the bond, each gesture confirmed the connection, and each glance carried the memory of weeks spent noticing, understanding, and caring for each other from a distance by the time they parted that evening. There was a sense of anticipation and excitement for what lay ahead. The connection that had begun on a rainy street had been nurtured in the quiet spaces of the office, and had grown through subtle gestures and shared moments, now had direction. It was no longer just a spark, it was a shared understanding, a promise of exploration, and the beginning of something meaningful. In the following days, the dynamic between them shifted naturally. The office remained professional, but the air between them was lighter, filled with warmth and quiet joy. Small interactions became more personal, brief touches were more confident, and shared laughter carried the knowledge that they were no longer holding back, outside of work. They began spending more time together, discovering shared interests, exploring the city, and deepening the connection that had begun months ago. Every step was careful, respectful, and human. Yet there was an undeniable intensity in the bond that had been patiently built over time, the memory of the rainy street, The brief initial glance and the weeks of subtle tension became part of their story, a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful connections begin in the most unexpected ways. Timing had been imperfect, circumstances challenging, but the persistence of the bond proved stronger than any obstacle. Alex and Jamie's story had begun in a moment of chaos, continued through weeks of careful observation and unspoken understanding, and now had reached a point of mutual recognition and intentional connection. It was a journey of patience, awareness, and the quiet courage to acknowledge feelings despite the risks. And as they moved forward together, both knew that the spark they had discovered in a fleeting glance had grown into something enduring, something real, and something worth exploring. Life had placed them together at the worst possible moment, but that moment had led to the best possible beginning.